Hello, and welcome to the On Track, Off Track podcast. My name is Jared Colow, and I'm here with Victor Oporto-Gola, and this is episode 1. We're going to be discussing today the Monaco GP and Indy 500 from last weekend, the retirement of the Bugatti Chiron, and the potential future for Bugatti as a company. And then we're going to be doing a draft of cars that car companies didn't need to make, but made them anyways. But before we start, we're going to introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about why we're starting this podcast and why you should keep listening. So without further ado, Victor, if you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah, definitely. So as I said, my name is Victor Oporto-Gola, and we're both automotive professionals over here. We met at an MBA program for supercars, superbikes, and motorsports in Bologna, so Motor Valley. I have a huge passion for the automobile, anything from the cheapest cars all the way to the supercar realm, mostly supercars. I've worked in the auto industry for, I think, about 12 years now, and I don't see an end in sight. So I have a lot of opinions. I know you do too as well. So yeah, this is why we're starting it.
Yeah, absolutely. As for me, I am a little bit more of a motorsport head, although I love automotive and motorsports really towards the top of my passions. I've worked in motorsports in America with Pirelli Motorsports, which manages Trans Am, Formula 4, Formula Regionals, and the Sports Car Vintage Racing Association. As Victor mentioned, we both studied in Italy in the Bologna Motor Valley. We also have a variety of other experience, both within our professional lives and also in our personal lives, that has taught us a lot about cars. And we're here to talk about it and share some opinions and see what you guys think. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into our first topic, which is the Monaco GP from this past weekend. As you can see, I'm wearing my Ferrari hat because Charles Leclerc finally got that first win at Monaco that he's been chasing since he started racing single-seaters. As a former Scuderia Ferrari F1 employee, give me your reactions, Victor.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. We've been waiting for it. We've been looking for it. It's amazing. At his home Grand Prix, no less. This is something that everyone's dreamed of, winning at their home GP, and Monaco just makes it extra special. So it's something that everyone's just so excited for. I'm sure the Tifosi are overwhelmed, and everyone at the back at Maranello is super happy. I'm sure Charles probably partied his ass off
Mm-hmm.
right afterwards. So, but yeah, it was great. It wasn't the best GP from a viewership standpoint, but it was still special nonetheless.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. The race started. We had the first lap. Everything was going well for Charles. He was able to hold it into the first corner. Everything was fine. And then in the back of the pack, you see some sparks fly up, a little bit of dust. And then they cut and show the major incident between K-Mag and Sergio Perez. Also picked up the other Haas driver in that crash. So double DNF for Haas, Sergio Perez DNF. A little bit later in the lap, you had Ocon driving over his teammate. The race is red flagged. Everybody goes, changes their tires, and from that moment, it's pretty much no passes for the rest of the race.
You're right,
Which
but
was
let's not forget Signs. He got super lucky. He had a puncture. First, I think it was second corner maybe. It looked like he was out of the race. Red flag. He's back in position. So super
yeah,
lucky.
yeah, super lucky. Um, After that moment, there were 5 overtakes total in the race. 0 overtakes within the top 10 of the race. So, 1 through 10 was basically the qualifying on Saturday was the race.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people are talking now about Monaco, and they've been talking about Monaco for the last couple of years and what value Monaco has on the Formula One calendar and whether or not we should be racing there. And if we're racing there, whether there should be special Monaco rules or special Monaco tires, or does the track need a layout change? What's your opinion on Monaco and the future of Monaco for F1?
I think that they should first of all keep it. It's in the history books. It's something that's, it's part of the Triple Crown, right? So you can't really get rid of it unless you want to, change Formula One in its entirety. So I think we should definitely keep it, but I do think there has to be some change, whether it's a rule change or a layout change. Um, the cars, I mean, everyone said it. They're too big. They're too fast for the track. But there could be a layout change to accommodate that, whether it's getting rid of the chicane after the tunnel, making it a straight, so a DRS zone so we can pass, possibly extending the actual circuit, or mandating a two stopper, or if there's a red flag like we just had, making sure that that doesn't count towards the tire change.
Hmm.
So there could be something that it could be changed, but I definitely think we should keep it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think Monaco needs to stay on the calendar as much as I'm bored most times I watch it. Although, admittedly, in the last few years, there have been some exciting races despite the lack of overtaking because of strategy decisions and things like that. But this one was one of the most boring F1 races I've ever watched. And if it wasn't for Charles Leclerc being in the lead of the race and finally winning his first Monaco GP, his first home race, then this would have been probably one of the most forgetful Formula One races in history as well. So I think that looking at the chicane after the tunnel is an idea. I think also I've heard some people mention maybe cleaning up the last corner, because that last corner really puts you in a bad position where it's almost impossible to make an overtake on the front straight if a driver slows you down on that awkward double right hander. So I think those are both things that could be looked at, that could be addressed. I agree that there probably needs to be some rule changes. I I mean, I know a few people, shouting out another F1 YouTuber, Matt and Tommy at P1. They have talked multiple times about how Formula One should consider forcing two stops in the races rather than just forcing one stop. If they force two stops in this race, then even with the red flag, you would have still had to have one more stop. Um, People have talked about a special Monaco tire. I think you look at Pirelli and they want to make tires that last so they can advertise that they make good tires for their consumers. But at the same time, you can't have the medium tire able to last the entire race and people with fresh rubber behind. I mean, George Russell was on a used medium tire, and Max Verstappen, one of the best overtakers in Formula One history, was behind him on fresh hards, and he still couldn't make the pass. That's got to be unacceptable. So I think it needs to be a mix of looking at the track, looking at the tires, and looking at the regulations in Formula One to come up with the solution for that.
Yeah, definitely. I understand that. The thing about Monaco, though, is that it's hard to change. It's been on the calendar for so long that any change, there's resistance to it internally and externally. For the viewers, people can skip it, but at the same time, it does give teams in the lower rankings a chance to score points, as we saw this weekend, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just another max domination. We had also, V Carb up there with Tsunoda, right? We had Albon scoring points. So, even Gasly, even with the whole
Mhm.
Ocon, he scored points. So it does give teams a chance instead of just the top five, four teams, whatever, every single time. So there has to be something said about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, but I think one of the things also that is always the most frustrating when you look at Monaco is then comparing it to the other amazing great race that happens on the same weekend every year, which is the Indy 500. So let's take a step back and talk about that race. Joseph Newgarden, back-to-back victory for Team Penske. The last time back-to-back victory was Helio Castroneves, one of the legends of the Indy 500. Um, Now, comparing the overtakes, the Indy 500 had 649 passes this year. There were 18 different drivers that led the race with a total of 49 lead changes. And of course, the race was won on a last lap pass for the lead over Pato O'Ward in the McLaren. This was the second year in a row that Newgarden won the race with a last lap pass as well. Just excitement from the green flag to the checkered flag all the way through. And that's what you want as a racing fan, is to watch cars go after each other, to not be sure who is necessarily going to win until the checkered flag waves. So I know you watched quite a bit of the Indy 500 this year. I want to hear your reactions to the race.
Yeah, as you said, it was a lot more exciting than Monaco for sure. It it's something that it's a race on its own. Even though there's a whole Indy, season, the Indy 500 in itself is a standout race, right? So it's it's something that everyone looks forward to every year. It's always exciting. So it definitely needs to show. It's an example, let's say, for other races in any series, to be honest, to show how exciting it could be. I think you said it was about 600 and something passes throughout the
Mm-hmm.
whole thing versus five on Monaco. So that just shows that it's something that the fans will just love. Even if you're not a huge racing fan, you can show that to someone that doesn't care about racing at all and show them how exciting it can be. That's what makes it a great race. I in the past I wasn't a big Indy fan, and then I watched the Indy 500 a couple times, and it got me into it. That's it. It's a special race for sure. And like you said, the last lap pass, Pat O'Ward thought he had it in the bag, and Newgarden passed him. That makes that's something so exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that's crazy, and it's interesting that it's a spec race, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not an engineering race. So everyone theoretically has the same chance of winning, depending on how good they are, or how they take care of their tires, how they So it comes down more to the racing driver than, let's say, Formula One,
Mm-hmm.
even Le Mans, even a WEC race. It comes down to more of the team versus the driver. So the Indy 500 and the Indy series as a whole is more of a driver's season, a driver's competition than it
Mm-hmm.
is engineering, which it's special in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the exact reason that you see drivers that were successful drivers in Formula One, but never top competitors, never people fighting for championships, coming into IndyCar and performing quite well. Whether you're talking about Marcus Ericsson, I mean, I know Roman Grosjean hasn't gotten the results that he was looking for in IndyCar, but by far he's done better in IndyCar than he did in Formula One. And this is because it is a series that rewards a good driver. It rewards a good team too, but it comes down more to how are you setting up the car, like you said, how are you preserving the tires, what's your fuel strategy. It's a very interesting series where you never really know exactly what's going to happen until the end, and I love that for racing and for motorsports as a whole. And I think IndyCar has also seen a lot of success on the heels of Drive to Survive, giving more viewership to motorsports as a whole, not just Formula One. So I expect people to be looking to IndyCar as Formula One kind of tries to figure out how to ramp up the excitement to get that excitement out of racing during the season sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Let me get your thoughts on how the pits work. Watching the drivers come into the pits is just chaos, right?
Mm-hmm.
It Formula One is a lot more structured. It feels a lot more safe. If there's any impediments, there's penalties. In the Indy 500, it's just madness. People just pull in, pull out. There's three
Mm-hmm.
wide pit lane. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And I've looked at the same thing and thought that's a mistake waiting to happen, an accident waiting to happen. But at the same time, it seems to work out for them, and it's really exciting. I mean, the race off pit road. Imagine if Formula One cars like raced off of pit road. It's unfathomable to think about. But it adds to the excitement of the race. It puts a little bit more pressure on the pit crews even more than necessarily in Formula One. Um, Puts a lot of pressure on the driver to hit their marks and hit them correctly. So I think it's a very American thing. If you watch NASCAR, it's very similar to the way that NASCAR does their pit stops. So I think that's very much in the culture of racing here in the United States. Um, if someone gets hurt one day and there's a really bad accident, then maybe the rules will change. But I think until that happens, it's going to be a defining feature of the racing.
Yeah, there was that one incident. I don't remember who it was, but
Mhm.
someone bumped somebody else into their or past their pit stop, right?
Yep.
So it was
Yeah,
crazy.
it does happen. It absolutely does happen.
Yeah,
So rounding out motorsports right now, we've got the Canadian GP, your home GP, coming up next in Formula One.
yeah.
Let's get some quick reactions and ideas about what's going to happen in this next race.
So I mean, they call it a street circuit, but it's really an actual circuit. It's the perimeter of an island off of the coast of Montreal. I think that Red Bull has a chance to come back. They're obviously the favorites. It's definitely going to be completely different than Monaco. It'll be interesting to see whether Ocon sits out. There's rumors that he'll sit out because of his crazy behavior, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
in the last race. So Doohan might pop in and show his stuff. So we'll see how that goes. Montreal is always exciting. They have long, fast straights in it and hard braking zones. So it rewards drivers that are brave on the brakes and the
Mm-hmm.
braking. So it'll be interesting to see that. That's always good. It's always a fun race. I've gone there, I think maybe 6 times in Montreal, starting from 2013, I believe. And one more exciting one is 2014 when Daniel Ricciardo won that
Mm-hmm.
race. That was very unexpected, but it was really fun. The race can pull a lot of different, crazy results that you wouldn't expect. So, being an inducted Tifosi, I think that I'm hoping that Ferrari will do well again.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, both on the podium, hopefully a win, but you never know. Red Bull's the favorite. How about
Yeah.
yourself?
Yeah, I think that Red Bull will probably make a resurgence at this track. It's much more of a Red Bull style circuit. It rewards ballsy overtaking maneuvers, which is Max Verstappen's specialty. So even if he doesn't set the qualifying lap, which recently the McLarens and the Ferraris are, you know, just as likely to get in pole position. Um, any given qualifying session. So even if he doesn't start in the lead, I think Max will probably end in the lead. In regards to the Ocon situation, personally, I think that Ocon is going to end up driving in the race, as exciting as it would be. But as a fan, what I want to see is I want to see Mercedes pay Alpine to use that second seat as a test for Kimi Antonelli, because there's been all these rumors about him beating George Russell in a test recently, and he's going to be the next Mercedes driver. It'll never happen because, I mean, Toto Wolff is Ocon's manager, so Ocon would be pretty pissed if Toto put a different driver in his car. With that said, as a fan, I would love to see something like that happen because I'm sick of Ocon's antics as well as everyone else is, I think.
Yeah, and to that point, they said Antonelli's beating Russell in the test or whatever, but Daniel Ricciardo was very like really close to Max Verstappen last year in a test, and look how he's doing now. So
Yeah.
it's not indicative really of how a driver might do in an actual race with other drivers around them.
Mm-hmm.
How to start the pits, the everything, right? So Antonelli would be cool. I personally think that Duan deserves a chance to at least, show what he's got, or at least another rookie.
Mm-hmm.
It was the same grid this year as it is last year, right? So to see another driver would be great. I mean, we saw how Behrman did in the beginning of the year, and he did great. He's still up, 11th or 12th in the
Yeah.
championship. So it's, so it'll be interesting. It'll be cool to see, a lot of rookies get points and bump out, the not so great F1 drivers that are currently on the grid.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see personally.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right, so next we're going to hop into our next discussion on the automotive side, the off track side of the on track, off track pod. And we're going to talk about the retirement of the Bugatti Chiron. So, Bugatti just announced that they're going to be producing the last ever Bugatti Chiron, the Super Sport L'Ultime edition. It is essentially just a paint job on the standard Super Sport. It's got some fancy badging to show off that it's the final car, and I'm sure it's going to cost an arm and a leg to some collector, probably in Saudi or somewhere else. But either way, the Chiron, obviously the successor to the Veyron, one of the most historic cars in automotive history, at least in recent automotive history. Chiron was the first road legal car to break the 300 mile per hour mark, or 490 kph. It set the 0 to 400 kph back to zero in 41.96 seconds, which was the record at the time. And it's, of course, powered by a W16 engine, one of the coolest engines in automotive. Started with 1,500 horsepower. The Super Sport then got bumped to 1,600 for the rest of the life cycle. Talk to me about what the Chiron means for Bugatti, what it means for automotive history, and what you thought about this car's impact as we see its last model being retired.
Yeah, well, it's a car that will definitely go down in history. It had a big name to live up to compared to the Veyron, breaking all types of records. Chiron was faster, but the Veyron was what cemented the current Bugatti in the history books. However, the Chiron was more of a driver's car than the Veyron ever was. It had a lot more power, about 50% more power than a Veyron, which is already insane. So it's a car that'll definitely go down in history. The W16 in itself, it's a massive engine, ton of power. Never really sounded that great. It had it had presence, but it wasn't a screaming V12 or anything like that. It sounded more bellowy, more like a beast breathing. Let's say a lot of turbo whoosh, a lot of air moving through that engine, but it didn't really scream like some of the best engines out there. It's a car that demands respect, but also you can drive it like an everyday car. There's more than a few of them driving around as daily drivers. I know in Toronto, where I'm from, there's a couple that are just driving around. Someone just took possession of the last 1,500 horsepower Chiron.
Mm-hmm.
Now they've announced the 1,600 horsepower ones. I think it's a Super Sport, the last one. It's a car that demands respect, and I respect it for that. It's something that it's a car of top trumps. Although Koenigsegg eventually beat it to the top speed 0 to 400 to 0 or whatever, but still a Chiron is something that no one can deny the fact that it's up there in the history books. Right? So it's the last of the W16. They announced that they're going to have a V16 hybrid, the next car. The Bolide is actually going to have the last of the W16, but it's not a street legal car. So the last one will be the Chiron. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. The Chiron, it does demand respect. For me, as someone who loves motorsports and specifically track-based motorsports, Bugatti has never been the top brand for me, as it was more of a straight line speed, raw top speed power type of brand. Although, of course, the Veyron was one of the coolest cars that came out when I was first becoming an automotive enthusiast. The Chiron was a more refined Veyron in my mind. It had sharper lines, it had a more aggressive look, obviously more power. So it was a car that demands respect. It was never one of my favorite supercars or hypercars, but it's sad to see the W16 go. You gotta love that engine. You gotta love the creativity of Bugatti as a brand to come back with such a punch with the Veyron, to continue it with the Chiron, and to really build a new identity for the brand that revived itself and is now going to hopefully continue in the future as they begin producing hybridized Chiron, or not Chirons, hybridized Bugattis under the control of Mate Rimac. And I think it's going to be a really interesting future for the company. You mentioned they teased the engine for the next car, V16 hybrid. They haven't released any specs yet, but some rumors that I was able to dig up online are saying it's probably going to be 8.3 liters, rev to 9,000, with about 1,800 horsepower, so 200 more than the Chiron. What percentage of that comes from the hybrid system and comes from the engine, and how it sounds, and all of that is to be determined. What kind of car they put it in. That's all going to be announced relatively soon, I think in the next month or so at one of the auto shows. But I'm excited to see what the future of Bugatti looks like. I really like Mate Rimac. I really like Rimac as a brand. And I think that using Bugatti to still produce combustion engine cars, but with a hybridization element, is probably the best strategy to keep this brand alive in an era when, making a 1,600 horsepower W16 is not going to be possible under future regulations as stuff gets stricter with emissions and fuel consumption and stuff like that.
Right. And, when you look back at the history of Bugatti, it is a motorsports brand. If you walk down the streets of Monaco, there's a statue of Louis Chiron,
Mm-hmm.
racing Bugatti in what was F1 before F1, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it does have history in that sense. They haven't continued that, but they have continued how crazy the company is. We had uh, uh, Maurizio Reggiani as a teacher at school, and he helped develop the engine of the EB110.
Mm-hmm.
And that itself had a crazy engine. It was the fastest car when it came out. And it had a tiny little V12, a 3.5 liter V12, also with 4 turbochargers.
Mm-hmm.
So they continued that, and it's great to see the company still continue the craziness. The
Mm-hmm.
V16 is supposed to be naturally aspirated, right? So they're taking away the turbos. They're making sure that it has the soul, let's say, of a sports car. From what I could dig up, it's supposed to be, like I said, about 1,800 to 2,000 horsepower. Half of it is supposed to come from the engine. Half of it is supposed to come from the hybrid drive, the electric.
Okay.
So whatever it is, it's still a crazy powertrain.
Mm-hmm.
There's not really many cars that can touch it. Maybe a Koenigsegg, but maybe another Rimac, Navera or something like that, or a Pininfarina Battista. But it's something that I feel needs to continue. All the Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Pagani's, that type of stuff, they're in a realm where they're sandwiched in the top end. But Bugatti, Koenigsegg, those type of brands, they're way up above and they're pushing the limit of what is possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether you like a particular car or not, the fact that they can build something that nobody else can is respectable. The last V16 car was, I believe, a Cadillac from the 30s.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of them, and they have massive engine bays, right? So I wonder how it's going to be longer. W16 is a VR8 with two banks, so it's maybe 6 cylinders wide or deep. This is going to be 8 cylinders long, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a big engine, and it's going to be crazy to see what proportions the new car is going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, given the history with Veyron setting top speed records, with Chiron setting top speed records, that there's a whole list of records that Bugatti is trying to beat with this engine and is building it specifically for that purpose. I'm sure with the hybridization, the acceleration is going to be something that we've maybe never seen in this class of hypercar before. So that's going to be really exciting. I'm sure the videos when they put out those first tests of the pre-production models are going to blow us all away, and I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, already the bolide in itself is crazy. There's a Top Gear video of it of the I think it's Jack Ricks and then Andy Wallace just ripping the thing, and it's crazy.
Yeah.
So if they take lessons from that into the new car, I think it should be amazing.
Yeah. And I hope they do that as well in terms of the handling performance of the car. I would love to see this next successor of the Chiron have more of a handling focus than the Chiron and the Veyron had. The Chiron was an improvement on the Veyron. I'd like to see this one as an improvement on the Chiron because the Bolide is obviously a track car built for the track, but it's not road legal. I would love to see them make a road legal car that someone could still bring on the track and rip up on a track day
Yeah.
or take around the Nürburgring.
Though credit to Bugatti making different models of the Chiron, and one of them was the Sport, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it had more of a focus on corners and turning and being an actual sports car rather than top speed. It had a top speed 230 miles an hour, which is still crazy, but it's not the
Mm-hmm.
250, 300 that we've seen from the Chiron, the Super Sport. The Bugatti has learned some lessons from the Chiron, and I really hope that it gets put into the new car in that sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this really feeds well into our next and final topic of discussion for today's podcast, which is going to be a bit of a draft, like a sports draft. Each of us are going to pick one car back and forth until we have a roster of 4 cars each. And then we're going to debate which one of us has the better roster of 4 cars. And the topic for today's draft was actually inspired by the Bolide, the video we were watching the other night together on the Bolide, and we were talking about what are some of the craziest cars that companies have made that they just didn't have to make, but did it anyways because it was crazy and cool. Now, we decided that the Bolide is actually not going to be eligible for this because it's not a road legal or a street legal car. But
Correct.
there's quite a few other road legal, street legal, crazy cars that have been out there. And we're going to jump right in and start sharing our thoughts. So, Victor, I'll give you the first pick in today's draft. What is your number one pick for the craziest car that didn't need to be made but was anyways?
How generous of you. So the first car I'm going to pick is it might be an obvious one, but I think the Lexus LFA deserves top spot in my opinion. It is a car that Toyota and Lexus are not known for.
Mm-hmm.
It's a car that they didn't have to build. It's a car with an engine that surpasses most other, just in terms of sound. They rebuilt the car from, they were going to make it an aluminum car, and then they thought, scrap it, we're going to make it in carbon fiber. It's so over engineered. They even bought a loom, a carbon fiber loom, just to make parts for the car. It's a car that has so many firsts for Toyota and Lexus. They lost money on every single one. It's way above. They're punching way above their weight. It might have not sold in the greatest numbers, but most of these cars don't. It's not a when people buy supercars, a lot of them look for the badge, the prestige, to show off to their friends.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, nobody thought a Lexus was that great. They're known for nice sedans, but not anything crazy like this. So my first top pick would be an LFA.
I think that's a great pick. My first pick is going to be a homologation special car. It's going to be the Mercedes-Benz CLK GTR, one of the craziest looking cars that you could ever put on the road. I don't think there's a single car out there other than that car where you really think I could take this car to the grocery store and then drive to Le Mans and win. and
In the 90s, though, that was a group of cars, and the CLK GTR was one of the top ones of that spec. So
yeah,
kudos. That's a good. I didn't think about that, but it's a good car.
yeah, that's always been one of my favorites. I think it's my favorite Mercedes that's ever been made. So that's going to cement my first pick. I'll send it back to you now.
That, like I said, that's a great pick. I'm jealous I didn't think about that first, to be honest. My next pick is actually a new car that is coming out. It's been announced, but it hasn't been released as of yet.
Okay.
It is the new Ford Mustang GTD,
Hmm.
right? So that is a
Wow.
car
Great
that,
pick.
right? So that's a car that Ford has never been in that area, in that space. It's a car that comes from the racing world. It's pretty much a GT3 RS fighter. It's going to be a $300,000 Mustang. That in itself is crazy. It's a crazy sentence to say, but when you look at the specs, it's nuts. Inboard suspension, full carbon body, downforce similar to a GTD or GT3 car. It it's a car that I'm really excited to see what it can do. So although it's not out yet, it's been announced, it's been planned, it's going to be out. They've taken pre-orders already, so I think it deserves to be there.
I think that's an amazing choice, and that wasn't even on my radar on the list of cars that I put. So far, I'm loving both of these teams. All right, so I actually had two cars I had marked down as my second because I thought you were going to take one of them before. So I'm having to decide right now, and I think that I'm going to pick the Aston Martin Valkyrie. Um,
That's not street legal though.
no, they have
Oh
the
no, the
street
Valkyrie
legal.
is. The Valkyrie is. I was
Yeah,
thinking of the Valkyrie. Yeah, okay, the Valkyrie is. Yeah.
yeah. Um, Adrian Newey designed, essentially only created because of contractual agreements between Red Bull and Aston Martin when Aston Martin was a Red Bull sponsor. A super insane F1 inspired car. I've seen them in person, and it almost doesn't look like a car. It looks like it glides over the road more than it drives over the road. Insane underbody downforce. It doesn't look like any Aston Martin that's ever been created or ever will be created. So I think the Valkyrie is going to have to take my second spot.
That's a good one. That was on my list, to be honest. It's a crazy car. It's one of those cars that it's at the top of its game, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's nothing else to be said. It's just a crazy car.
Absolutely.
My next car is going to be a little bit left field. It's not a sports car, but it is a car that I think represents the man of its era, the Volkswagen Phaeton.
Ah.
Right? So Volkswagen, as we know, is the people's car. It's supposed to be a cheaper brand, but the Phaeton is essentially a Bentley Continental underneath, and it comes from the mind of Fernand Piech. So Jason Camisa and the Haggerty team, they did a whole Piech about Fernand Piech, but him as a person, as an executive, he is one of my business executive heroes. Let's say he changed the automotive world like nobody else in recent past. So that car it's an embodiment of what he thought the company should be,
Mm-hmm.
making the greatest engineered products on earth. So although it didn't sell well, although the resale value isn't great, you can pick them up for pretty cheap compared to, but it's a W12 Volkswagen that you can have a conversation with someone at 300 kilometers an hour, no problem.
Yep.
So well engineered. It's like a tank underneath. I think it deserves to be up there just for what it represents.
I think that's a great pick. Ferdinand Piech, also the mind behind the Veyron, the inspiration towards this era of Bugatti that we just discussed. And funnily enough, my third car is also a Ferdinand Piech crazy invention, and it's also a Volkswagen. It's the Volkswagen XL1, the
Nice.
most fuel efficient Volkswagen created with the goal of driving 100 kilometers on 1 gallon of fuel. It was a limited edition production car sold, and they're out there driving around in the world. It was made to be a reliable daily driver that someone could use, and super fuel efficient, and was actually created almost as a sister car to the Veyron, where the Veyron is as powerful and sporty as you can get, and the XO1 is as efficient and environmentally friendly and user friendly as you can get. Ferdinand Piech really deserves so much credit for being the type of guy that creates a car that ends up on this list.
Yeah, definitely. It is a very cool car. I didn't think about it, even though I know about the car pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, it's a car that only could come from someone like him, someone almost like a dictator,
Yes, yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, but yeah, good pick. My last car, I had a whole list of cars,
Mm-hmm.
but the last car I'm choosing because of also what it represents, and it's the first generation Honda NSX.
I had that one on my list.
Did you?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good car. So it's a car that Honda decided to make that's very reliable. You could drive every day, but also made Ferrari up their game. It was faster than any Ferrari at that time. It was more reliable, more comfortable. They had Senna as their development driver. It debuted um, VTEC to the world, which is a crazy technology still to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Other manufacturers are still trying to copy it. So it's a car that I think is a product of its time. It Ferrari wouldn't be what it is today without that car, funnily enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the new NSX, no. The first generation NSX is peak Honda in my opinion, other than that's 2000 or something like that. But I think the NSX deserves a place in history for
Yeah,
that reason.
I couldn't agree more. I think that yeah, that was definitely one of my choices for the last pick in this draft. But I'm actually going to get to have a sneaky grab, one that I thought was going to go in the second round and dropped all the way to the fourth round with the Mercedes SLR McLaren.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, okay, I see it.
there's literally, it's a Mercedes built by McLaren. It's absolutely did not need to happen. It's one of the craziest cars, especially because of how classy it looks on the outside and how much you would almost not even know what it is if you weren't a car person or weren't an enthusiast. But then you pull up the bonnet and you see the front mid engine, you see all the carbon fiber, you look at the little McLaren badges on the side and those big old brake calipers, and it starts showing its secrets to you the more you look at it. Of course, then they made the SLR McLaren Sterling Moss, which is even crazier looking than the standard SLR McLaren. I think that's two Mercedes on the list, kind of crazy, but two very different cars.
Now that one to me is an oddball. I don't know if I would have chosen it on my list for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a car full of compromises. Gordon Murray is part of that, and he's a genius. He's one of my favorite automotive engineers. But he wanted it to be more of a sports car, and Mercedes wanted to be more of a GT car. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of in between. They didn't know exactly where they wanted to be. It even came with a 5-speed automatic, which is crazy to think about. It is a cool car. Don't get me wrong. It's one of the cars in like it's a core memory for me. When I was a kid, I actually got a ride in one when I was about 11 years old. So it's something that has made me into more of a car person. So I really appreciate it in that sense. But for this list, it wouldn't have made my top 4 or 5, to be honest. But
Uh,
it is an interesting choice, though. It's a crazy car.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll recap our list right now, but before we recap, I want to ask, are there any honorable mentions, anything you had
Yeah.
written in that didn't make the list?
Yes, and there's actually, I was gonna ask you that as well. There's two, let's say 3 cars, because two of them are kind of the same, that I want to mention. One is the Toyobaru twins,
Yeah.
the Subaru BRZ and the Toyota GT86 Scion FRS.
Mm-hmm.
Those cars are completely different than the rest of their lineup, especially when it came out in about 2011-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Subaru is known for their all-wheel drive, rally bred cars, or sedans and family vehicles and stuff, and this is the only rear wheel car I think in their lineup in history. It could
Yeah,
be
at least in since their early years of Subaru.
yeah, so it's something that I think deserves to be mentioned. It brought affordable enthusiast rear wheel drive cars back to the market. That the only thing that was out there was really like a Miata or something,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that deserves a mention. And then another car that I think deserves mention, which is also just a crazy left field car, is the Maybach Exhilarating. Right? So they only made one, maybe two, I think, but it's a car that Maybach is not known for. It's something that's just ridiculous.
Hmm.
I think Jay-Z owned it at one point or whatever, millions of dollars, but it's road legal and it's not a luxury sedan as they're normally made, but I think it's a car that is pure design.
Hmm.
So, from the wheels to the long hood, it almost looks like a Darth Vader type of car, like a Batmobile or something. That to me has always been on my list for just pure design and presence.
Yep. I think those are some great call outs. For me, I had three left on my list that weren't picked up. First one is the Renault Clio V6.
Ah, nice.
Take a hatchback. Hatchbacks are traditionally front wheel drive. We're going to make this one rear wheel drive. We're going to put in a big screaming V6, naturally aspirated. Renault Clios, people race Renault Clios, but this is a whole nother beast. This is
Yeah.
a supercar killer in a sporty hatchback. So I think that's going to be one of my honorable mentions. Another honorable mention is going to be the BMW M1, a car that
I was thinking about
BMW.
that, to be honest. That's why I got the
Yep.
BMW.
Yeah, that's a car that BMW had never made anything like it until then, and has never made anything like it since. It's essentially a Lamborghini in a BW or a BMW costume, and I think that's going to be up there. And then my last one, I don't know if it even belongs in this category or not, but I felt like I had to mention the Dodge Viper because of course Dodge is known for making muscle cars, and a Viper is a quintessential muscle car. But at the same time, the Viper was winning endurance races that were going up against European sports cars, rear engine, uh, rear wheel drive sports cars. And it was dominating those racing series. They had to ban the Viper from IMSA to make it competitive again. So I think that you're never going to compare a Viper to a Challenger. It's a
Yeah,
completely different type of car. So I think it deserves at least a mention.
I agree with you there with the Viper. However, if you look at its history and what it is, then it makes sense, right? It's Carol Shelby's, you know, what's it called? A throwback to his Shelby Cobra days, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
modern Shelby Cobra. So if you look at it that way, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Uh, Ford didn't want anything to do with it, so at the time he was at Chrysler making the Omni GLH and crazy cars like that, right? So I think if you look back at it, it makes sense, but it is a crazy car nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. So between my list and your list, I'd love to hear your reaction. Which one do you think of us has won this pick?
Obviously, it's going to be biased, but I feel like because I threw in the Phaeton, where you could daily
uh,
drive it, it makes more sense as a garage as a whole. Whether you had cars that were just insane, crazy, like these are cars that they're hardcore cars, right? A
yep.
CLK GTR is not a daily driver, no
Yep.
matter how you're gonna throw it. It's not a daily driver, right? So I think just on that basis, I won just because there are cars I could drive every day.
Yep. Yeah. I totally get that. Imagine having this garage, CLK GTR, Valkyrie, an SLR McLaren, and then a VW XL1 as
Fine, yeah,
your daily driver. It would be a pretty ridiculous garage for sure.
yeah. That's
Amazing.
fun though. I like these games. It makes you think about what companies are predispositioned to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, really interesting to think about. I think neither one of us had any bad answers, even in our honorable mentions. I think that this was a great list. So that's going to finish off our episode for today. Thank you to everyone that listened to our first official episode of the On Track, Off Track podcast. We're going to be coming back with this same format every week, talking motorsports, talking automotive news, and then having a little bit of fun talking about our dream cars or ideas we have and opinions on the industry. Do you have any closing thoughts before we sign off, Victor?
Not necessarily, more the fact that I'm enjoying this and I hope everyone else enjoys it. This will be something that will continue on for as long as we can. We have different opinions a lot of the time here, which is always fun, right? So I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for watching and for listening. And please subscribe and follow in whatever format you're going to be listening to the pod. And we'll talk to you next week.
See
Bye-bye.
ya.